Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ron. How are you this morning?
Good.
Okay. I see you're in your familiar Ron Carter Media Center.
Yes, my natural habitat.
Well, Ron, since the COVID intermission, which you term, you've become somewhat of a media personality. My goodness, I've seen your interviews with Lenny White, Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny. What inspired you to go online?
Well, three people who trust my judgment and whose I'm forced to trust theirs thought that the more I stay in my natural habitat and then continue hibernating, that no one would know who I was of the people who were supposed to know who I was. And they convinced me that they would trust my image and my responsibility and my history. And when I said no, I would mean really no. And when I say yes, that means I'm trusting them as far as we could trust each other, given this beginning mission. And it's working out pretty well, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I enjoyed your interview with Herbie, talking about how Zoom has now become part of our lives. And it is a great tool to be able to talk to people that you wouldn't ordinarily have the opportunity to connect with.
Well, I think more importantly for me, it allows me to teach students somewhere other than a block from my house,
Yeah.
True, true.
so to speak. I have a student who lives in Greece, so he has a lesson at 7 a.m. New York time because it's like 6 p.m. there or something like,
Sure.
something like that. And he's such a wonderful player. He needs some help, and that's my job. So if he were not on Zoom, I would never know he existed.
What are some of the dynamics when you teach on Zoom? Obviously, it's not the same as being there in person.
It's really difficult given everything that's involved, the local Wi-Fi, the system, the internet system, how many people are using it at the time we're using his, you know,
True.
what kind of gear does he have to allow me to get the best sound from him through this
Right.
system? Uh, can I accept at some point he's going to be frozen, and for 20 bars I will hear nothing what he's doing. I'm trying to follow my score. I mean, it's fraught with difficulty. Our job, our meaning the teaching collective, has to find a way to understand what that is and understand that it's a different ballgame now. The other big issue is that I've found in this one of my another phrase is it's the bane of my existence is that the academic teachers give the students more work because they think that now they're at their home, now that they are at their home, they have much more time to pile on the work, extra math, extra assignments, extra research, extra term papers. That means that something suffers. And I refuse to accept that the base lessons and practice will be one of those things that suffer. So I keep telling those guys, look, give those guys one less chapter to read, and I will give them one less etude. We'll be even.
Well, I'll tell you something. Last month, exactly, I guess a month ago today, when you did your last Zoom, uh, there was a young lady who hadn't practiced her bass in a year. Do you remember that?
No, but continue the story. I'm interested.
Okay, so you mentioned to her that the best thing for her to do was to take one etude and finish it,
Yeah.
complete it.
Okay.
And I thought that was such an incredible response because, when you're home alone all the time, you're like, oh, I'll read this. Oh, I'll read that. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect. And your point was, I don't care if it takes an hour and a half. To get back into what you're doing, practice one a day and get it perfect. I just thought that was fabulous.
Well, I'm not above doing it myself. When we were traveling, remember that word, traveling?
Is
Yeah, yeah. When we were on the
that a
road,
verb?
yeah, went on the road. I felt like the guy with a stick on my back and a bag on the end. When I get home, now that we are at the time we couldn't take our own bass, of course, and we were kind of either the bass du jour or we decided to take our own fold-up travel bass. My job when I got home was to take my bass out of my case and practice an hour on an A scale until I got it perfect. It didn't matter how long it took. It didn't matter how awful it started out. I just knew that within an hour, I had to nail this specific scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't just for the discipline of doing it. It's to know where my bass had those notes located. And when you play different basses, that the curvature of the strings are different, the
Right.
curvature of the fingerboard is different, the length of the fingerboard is different, the height of the bass is different, the kind of strings are different. All those factors are in the way of it not being my bass.
Yeah.
But no one wants to know that it's not my bass. They hired me to do a specific job, which is to lead, in this case, lead a trio or a quartet. To make that work, I need to have a certain skill level and a certain understanding that this is not my bass. I have to find out what it can do to allow me to play this bass. In the meantime, my focus is, can I make this bass feel like mine? When that gig is over and the tour's over, my job is to come back to New York, of course. And how quickly can I say hello to my bass and understand that this is what it feels like after not seeing it for 9 concerts or 8 concerts in terrible conditions, basically. So when I tell her to do that, I'm not above acknowledging that rule myself for different reasons, but the same effect is in place, the discipline and the outcome that we hope is a result of this new introduction to being disciplined to get something done for her.
It's different for us electric players, or primarily electric players, who just put it over your back, put it in the airplane, and you
Overhead.
remember those things too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The days of, years ago when I was working my first trip to California, Bobby Timmons, he was with Art Blakey at the time. He just left Art Blakey to put his own trio together with me and Tootie Heath. I found out that the process that Art Blakey used to use was get to the airport at the very last minute and walk out and talk to the attendant and let him walk out to the airplane with the bass, put the bass in the seat because it was too late to do anything else with it. Well, that worked for a couple of times with Bobby Timmons, but that kind of wore out real fast. And
Yeah, I'm sure.
of course, as the planes got smaller and theoretically more efficient, the bulkhead disappeared, and so did the people who were sitting behind the bulkhead. Their attitude also changed. So we're back to that. No bass on this tour. You got to take either something there or get a travel called flyaway bass. But again, when I got home, I had to take my bass out of my case and figure out how does it still work the same way as it did 9 concerts ago, and how quickly can I get back to saying hello, how are you?
Well, I think it's so important, whatever the reason is, whether it's, that young lady wanting to get back into it or trying to practice. I of course, it's different with an electric instrument, but you still want the long tones. You still want the articulation to be perfect. So the similarities are there as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The difference is you can see where you're going. I'm playing on my radar all night, every night, I don't have the frets or the diamonds in my fingerboard, so I'm hoping that my sense of how far it is from A to B flat is the same in most cases,
Yeah. I want to show you something that I bought these 2 books in 1973.
Wow.
At 71, at the Bumblebee bookstore in Boston, right next to the Berklee College of Music.
Okay.
And
I didn't know the MJQ was publishing Ornette's book, Ornette's Music. I just saw the publishing at the very bottom of Ornette's book, the MJQ publishing.
Yeah, well, I guess I think this was 65. Let me check. And I guess they put that out. Actually, it's 68. MJQ Music, 200 West 57th Street. And back then, obviously all we did going to music school was practice. You had to. But it was interesting because you remember John Neves, of course, right?
Sure, absolutely. And
when
Paul?
I walked in with my P bass, he goes, "Mr. Gross, the electric bass is not a valid musical instrument." Because it was part of that jazz police kind of thing where I guess for a lot of folks, it was a difficult thing seeing all of their hard work and practice sort of being sidestepped to rock music. You, of course,
I don't know that. I don't know that feeling. I never had that, man. I never felt that
Hmm.
Jocko was a threat to my livelihood, or James Jamerson, or Steve Bailey, who's my dear friend, Victor. None of those guys. I felt that these are the guys. Montgomery. We had a long talk many years ago. He was still with Lionel after he left Lionel Hampton's band, about what he did with the electric bass. Those guys are my friends. I'm a fan of those people,
Right.
because I watched how they have taken an instrument that was kind of called a pork chop in the slang of the instrument, and made it a very serious musical event. When you see them play, when you hear the results of their effort, Bootsy Collins, all those guys, man, they made the bass do something. So when those electric guys got on the scene and became more visible, and they brought their influence not just to the music, but to the use of amplification gear and the whole environment. I applauded those guys, man. I
Yeah,
didn't.
well,
I didn't
what I
feel.
was going to say is, I think,
Oh,
you embrace the instrument. Think about, I guess the first song that comes to my mind is Red Clay. What a great bass line.
yeah. Well, that only got there because Freddie didn't bring a part in. As in most of the guys to give you. I got the tune, but just put an intro to it for me. And here comes the downbeat with the guy saying, "Ready, roll 'em,"
Yeah.
And we get lucky and we strike the right notes at the right time, and hope that at the end of the tune, while they don't remember the intro, they won't forget it either.
Well, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. I wanted to talk a bit about your new book, because it's a phenomenal idea that, my God, who would have thought? Well, let me get a copy.
Ron, why did you pick the tune "Autumn Leaves"?
Well, it was the easiest one. First of all, everyone knows that song, man.
Okay,
That's a
there it
nice
is.
presentation too. Everyone knows that song, and
Okay.
every jazz player primarily has played this song at some point in their career, however brief their career was. Whether they work all day at an optometrist shop or at a deli on weekends with the guys, someone calls that song, man.
Mhm.
And having decided on a process to better show what I think a valuable transcription can look like, that song provided me an excellent format.
Okay,
And as that was the first tune that the Miles Band played nearly every night for 5.5 years,
right.
had 5.5 years of choices to make this process, as I envisioned it, come to fruition. And it was easy to pick five versions because it was the same personnel.
Right.
It's a perfect storm for a great kind of analysis, a great kind of laboratory. With the same band.
Controlled experiment, right?
Well, yeah, with the same band, with the same song, with the same basic format. The tempos change depending on factors that are out of our control, which is part of an experiment.
Right.
Sometimes we get to the gig right from the airport to the bandstand. On those gigs, we never had the same instruments. They were all different piano, different drums, different bass. We never sometimes had no sound check.
Sure.
It was really the essence of a perfect place to try these experiments, given the distance between each performance. And with a lot of help from Dave Barron and Boots Mallison, we figured out this is a way to make my view of making transcriptions more valid.
Right.
In this case, not only do you have a bass line, but you have a whole song to a total, in this case, totals 4 choruses times 5 different performances. And at the beginning of each sheet of the blueprint, you have a QR code which allows you to hear what you're looking at. So you can actually see how the bass line not only evolves for the 4 choruses, but 4 choruses times 5 versions.
Mhm.
You can hear how Herbie and Tony and Miles are waiting for this next bass from the guy who's hiding behind a palm tree to see where he's going to take them. And it's a great view of a transcription that's completely complete,
Mhm.
rather than just a bass line on page 3 of the book. Some of my lines are there, and I'm not against them doing that. I just think that
Right.
kind of leading them down the wrong way to think that this bass line is the ultimate bass line. It may be a great line. My question, which is why I came up with this view of this transcription book, so you can see how the line started out. You can see how it affected the band's process.
Right.
You can see the bass line developed over 4 or 5 times, and even better, you see how the band responds to this information.
Right.
You hear Herbie not play a chord, but he plays this chord because he remembers the last time. Or I will play a 6/8 rhythm in January, and in March I do it again. But he's all over. He's playing 3/4 against my 6/8, and Herbie's downbeat, and Miles is trilling because he's not quite sure where we're going, but he knows that I'll find one somewhere between then and now. So it's a perfect storm for me, and this is what I hope that not just bass players, I hope piano players will buy this book.
Okay.
So they can hear how Herbie is affected by what the bass player plays.
Wow.
So they can hear how Tony is waiting for my next rhythmic move and how he borrows something I already played the last concert with this song. How
Okay.
he uses that information because he hears it coming again, and how he responds. It's that kind of group transcription that we happen to stumble on as we were trying to make the bass line as important as we think it is, be better demonstrated as really being important. We got lucky with the concept, but I think it's a very valid way, and I would like to think that bass departments, wherever they are, will get involved in the bass camps. They have 40 kids at camp trying to play jazz. But look, get them this book, man, so they can see some additional options that no one's going to show them unless they have this kind of transcription like this.
Well, what I also found completely an embrace of the modern technology is the QR codes.
Yeah, that's great,
I mean,
man.
Isn't that something?
Think about how many records I have destroyed or you have destroyed.
Oh, yeah.
I'll put the quarter on top. Oh, that'll slow it down just that much. Well, if I put 3 quarters on top, it'll get even slow, but the pitch is going to change.
Yeah.
Right.
You have come up, well, quick, that's it. I can watch this a million times.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fantastic.
Wow, how great is that?
Yeah.
And when you look at the first version, all right, the 63 version in Monterey, you're doing your first chorus, and then the second chorus, we go from a C minor 7, next chord's a C sharp diminished. So not only is a bass player learning, oh, I go here, but then the important concept to me was, well, why is it a C sharp diminished? What? Okay, so that's an E, so that's oh, so that's why we're doing that. And I think that's even more important than the actual note is if you know what I'm saying, is
Sure. Yeah.
There's an incredible amount of theory there. There's so much to learn just from bar 1 to bar 2.
Yeah. And what's important for me is they see at the beginning of the book the original changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We started from somewhere.
Yep.
And we all would agree where that somewhere was, which is also important. They got to know where I'm starting with them and them with me, so that when my options are made visible, they understand they're based on this version of these chords that we all agree on are good changes. My job, I think, a bass player's job is to play the kind of chords that make the horn players do like this with their eyebrows, and say, oh man, now what?
That's great.
What?
And I also think the fact that you took the same song over 5 years and to hear from 63 to 68, just take those two and listen to them first. And then, oh, wow, where did it go?
How did it evolve?
Yeah.
64, 65, 66 to find out. Really, I'm excited about it. I'm fascinated with it, and for me personally, I'm going to go back and listen to a lot of other tunes and do the exact same thing. Now, just like you, I'm not going to write them out. The last thing I ever wrote out, Keith Copeland had me do the rhythm to the entire Ahmad Jamal, what was it, a Ponciana.
Oh,
Just
wow.
write out the rhythm.
Oh man, what a
The last one.
I thought he was your friend. Come on. Yeah.
Although I'll tell you, I did write you'll like this story because you love Eric Dolphy. So Downbeat wanted me to do a workshop column. And I said, all right, I'll transcribe God Bless the Child. And just the bass clarinet, solo bass. So about a week into it, I call Downbeat and say, hey, what if I took 4 4-bar phrases and then show you how you can use them as an educational piece? They said, oh, that's a great idea. And I went, thank God, because I hate transcribing. So
You asked for a tremendous work to get that, because I know that piece, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
Speaking of transcription, one of the things that I think bass teachers who want to show the kids bass lines, they will show them a transcribed bass line and have them play it through the keys. And that couldn't be any worse thing to do. First of all, Dave, I'm not sure how many kids, bass players, grown-ups or not, are going to have the kind of skill level, literally, to play a bass line that Paul Chambers' bass line or Ray Brown's bass line or mine. Secondly, I'm not sure they can find out where the notes are located, given the difference in skill level that these kids have, these beginning bass players have. And the third thing I worry about is that if they learn this bass line in the key of B flat, or D flat, for example, just a transcribed bass line from Oscar Pettiford or so.
Right.
If they don't play a song in D flat all night, that bass line is useless to them.
Right. Right.
And the bass line in D flat won't sound the same as G.
Right.
Or C.
Yeah.
Or
No,
F.
you're absolutely right.
So it's doing them a disservice not only in consuming that valuable time, but having them misunderstand this line that just transcribed. It in of itself is not transferable,
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. And that's why when someone calls Autumn Leaves, it's going to start on a C minor. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So why would you want them to do it in, let's say, G flat? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and especially if they start getting involved with other guys who are equally harmonically curious, and who are willing to accept a bass player's set of notes as being something really worthwhile for them to investigate. They aren't going to put in the key that limits that bass player's options, because they want to find out what he can do for us tonight.
Right.
When this theory class open,
Yeah.
I
Well,
used to-
one thing I would have suggested with the Autumn Leaves thing, your version on the Chet Baker record
that was
is,
the Paul Desmond.
yes, what is it? She was too good. She was too good for me, or something like that. Yeah. That should have been the next one, because you do some of the most, and your tone, and that's a beautiful recording. That whole album's just a beautiful album too.
It's a good song that day.
But you're also starting on a C minor. Go figure.
Yeah, well, that was, again, when you try those harmonic alterations and the new changes, one of the things I kind of start to tell myself in my head when I get to these gigs, even if they're not my band kind of gigs, before I do my harmonic experiments and go into my laboratory, I want the band leader and the guys in the band, the person in the band, to know that I really know this tune. I really know how it started out.
Yeah.
And so by the third course, I hope I've convinced them enough that allows me to play their first note on Autumn Leaves, E flat. I'm not lost.
No, you're in a flat third.
I got a plan here.
You got it. Well, that's great. There's something that you did with Tim Wells, that the director, and I'm not picking apples. I got a plan.
Yeah,
I've co-opted it. I do give you credit, but I had co-opted it.
I love apples too.
That was great.
Yeah.
Very, very, very cool.
And again, you know, one of the things I hope with this book is the kids can see how your notes do in fact, affect everything above it.
Right.
Yeah.
They're a catalyst.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it isn't from the top down; it's from the bottom up for us.
Right.
That's exactly right. That's great. I had a few other interesting. I think you have fun with your mistakes.
Yeah, that's you get better, man. You make better mistakes. You
Yeah.
get great ideas. You know, one thing I hope that this book, this Chartography, also encourages the bass players to understand that they always have choices. They will never run out of things to do. But that depends on them remembering what they played.
Mm.
I mean, we all have our little crypts. We used to call them bags back in the old days. You know, open up our bag and play this da 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 da. We all have those, man.
Yeah.
And along the way, we find things that lead up to that kind of stuff. My hope is that when they look at this book, they will question, how did we get there? Other than we got there. Well, one way is we remembered the things that worked and developed those things to another level. That's critical for us.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because this book really, it goes in line with the comprehensive bass method, making the changes. I mean, everything fuses together.
Yes.
But I had a question. I want to go back to that, but there was something else that, you know, struck me. You know, when you were starting out and when most people pre-YouTube, let's say, or pre any of that stuff, you started with a Samandel book or an Edward Nene or something like that. Do you find that the modern day bass player learning jazz sort of doesn't get into the original Samandel? In other words, they start with jazz. They don't, because I know you're a big proponent of foundations.
Sure. Well, I know where you're going with this, and one of my second craw, so to speak, in my throat, is I think jazz bass teachers, generally don't increase the students' skill level as they become more and more involved with working more gigs.
Mm-hmm.
That they want to know how to play, dude. The basic bass line on the bottom, you know, and that's always good, you know. Or things, you know, tricks that they'll learn that they can show this bass player, but they don't increase the bass player's skill level that will allow him to find his own way physically on the bass. And that limits his choices because he can't find the notes that he's starting to hear. Or the piano player who likes Bill Evans or Herbie Hancock is going to play a new voicing that they won't find on the Ramsey Lewis record or even an Am Jamal record, and his notes have got to find a way to make that new piano voicing,
Right,
or the new guitar voicing work. But unless he can find these notes by knowing his instrument, he'll have a difficult time satisfying his curiosity and the band's hiring him because he's not playing the right notes because he can't find them.
right.
And I say that not to jump on bass teachers' case necessarily, but to encourage them that they got to find out how the bass works better, so they can tell the kid, yeah, this bass line is nice, but he found these notes because his hand was positioned this way. He knew that this note was F on the D string, but there's also these notes across the string. They shift this way. I mean, they have to know that really basic. There we go again with one S this time. Basic info to make him or her have the choices that the music is presenting them.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting you say that because somewhere in your biography, which is another book everyone needs to purchase, it's fascinating. You talk about going on a gig and everyone was doing some modal stuff and you went, oh, I know that. I learned that in my classical studies. And it just seems we're getting away from the basic foundations. YouTube has become a bit of a crutch in a way. Oh, I can learn these half a dozen songs and boom, I can get out and do a gig, versus I can learn to play my instrument.
Yeah, well, they see the results before they see the work that goes into it, I think.
Yeah.
They see Ray, they see Christian, they see all the good guys who really play the bass well and how they do. They don't understand that those guys started with Samandel at page 9.
Yeah,
I mean, page 9 this is the bass and this is the open strings.
that's it.
You know,
That's it. I
one
mean,
of-
even back when Rufus Reed's book came
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Good books too, by the way.
Oh, great book. Except the part on how to hold the electric bass, those pictures.
I'm not going to go there, man.
That's my show. I can.
One of the things I tell the parents who are very concerned about their daughter and son taking up the string bass, the weight, the cost, I tell them, one of the first stories I heard about, the jokes I heard about the string bass was this young kid is nagging his father to be a musician. He wanted to be a bass player because he saw, it was loud, it did all the things, so he said his father bought him the bass finally, and so he goes to school for the first lesson, and he comes home about an hour later, and his dad says, "Well, son, how was the bass lesson today?" He said, "Well, it was okay." The next lesson he goes a week later. He goes and he comes back hour and a half later, and the father says, "Why are you late today?" He said, "I learned the names of the strings today." His father's very impressed because he does some music, but he knows progress.
Right.
And so the third week, he takes the bass to school, and he comes back 1 hour and 25 minutes later, and the guy said, "Hey, son, what's going on here?" He said, "Today I learned the strings, E, A, D, G." And his father's thrilled because his son maybe starting to read a little music from the old days, right? He goes to school for the fourth lesson. He doesn't come home. He doesn't come home for 2 days. And his father's getting frantic. Saying, "What happened?" His son finally comes and says, "Son, what happened to you?" He said, "Dad, I had a gig." So it has been known to happen.
Yeah.
But I think Tom and David, once a bass player understands the control they have over the music and how important their notes really are, and how they can literally control the direction of the band, they'll stop and say, "Well, how can I find these notes? If that's so powerful, how can I find these notes?"
Every note is a different color.
Yeah, we're back to this page 9 in Samandel.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, because I remember I got Rufus's book and I got Samandel's book.
Yeah,
And then a few
great
months later,
combination, man.
they threw in Edward Nane,
Yeah.
which was actually a little more painful because the book was I couldn't put it in my bag.
and in Italian.
That's it. Tom, you had some interesting questions.
You mentioned we were talking about digital media and YouTube and things, and just the fact that this book has QR codes. Ron, reflect over, the value of digital media now with YouTube and streaming services. More than ever, I have more access to jazz than ever before. It can also be used as an educational tool. We can go back and watch the masters. We can go watch, Paul Chambers. We can see the footage of this, and it's also, it works as not only an educational but an inspirational tool.
Well, all that's true, but it
Yeah.
still starts with a live performance between you and your teacher.
Right.
And I think because we have so much YouTube available to us, it misleads these kids to think that there's nothing to it and I can really do it by myself. For all the questions I'm asked whenever I do interviews and master classes, you know, one thing I've always said, underlined, that this bass player, whoever he or she is, they need a teacher.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I never say a bass teacher, but of course that's implied, you know.
Right,
But then someone has to show them the instrument, how to hold it, what's
right.
the size they need, how to change the strings, what's the correct height for the strings, you know, what's the correct how to hold the bass. And in Canada, guys, I've seen bass players who uncase the bass by laying it on the floor. They take the bass out of the case with the bass laying literally horizontally on the floor. And then when I saw that happen, I said, "Man, why do you do that?" He said, "That's what we all do." I said, "Well, the jazz clubs in New York that I know, man, it's big enough for piano and upright piano, big enough for a set of drums, upright piano, and one microphone stand. There's no place on this bandstand, if that's how you're going to uncase your bass, to make this gig, because there's no room up there." You know, YouTube, for all the advantages that they are for the young people, they give them a false sense of history also, I think.
Right.
And because they don't see, never saw Paul Chambers practice. They never heard him have a teacher. They just see this great, wonderful playing, Ray Brown. What a fat stuff. And I think part of my generation's, Christian Bride's generation, is to encourage the kids. Yeah, those guys are what they are. But they started with page 9 of Samando.
Right.
And
Yeah,
they
it all
meant it.
goes back there.
Yeah, they meant it. But again, you know, I've never seen Oscar Pettiford play live. And when I came to New York, he'd have to go into Europe. You know, I missed that. And unfortunately, at that time, there were not the social media wasn't so big. So guys like that, I wish I could see those guys. And hear him play live and see how he held the bass and see how he found those great notes, because he wrote for the bass perfectly, man. You know, Tricketism, Swinging Till the Girls Come Home, all those two, they're just perfectly written for the instrument. How did he play them? I want to see how he got those notes. You know, well, these kids today, they can see how I'm trying to find them. They can see how Ray Brown tries to find them. They can see how Christian McBride finds them, Rufus. They can see how we find them. And I rue that I didn't have that opportunity when I was their age, but I'm not upset because I didn't see it. That just wasn't the time of the development of cameras and sneaking videos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because my wife and I right now are working on a documentary on Slim Galliard.
Oh, wow.
Mark, his son, is helping us with this. And when you think about Slam's Arco, you know darn well there was a Samandel book or something.
Yeah.
In his hands.
Yeah,
Even Bam Brown. You know, you cannot play like that.
No. Paul Chambers, he hasn't listened with the first bass with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. You know, that Slam stood on Town Hall 1944 with Don Byers. Fantastic.
Okay.
Oh.
And regarding Oscar Pettiford, I think Deep Passion may be one of my Desert Island tunes. Yeah. And because not only was he playing great bass, but his orchestration.
Yeah,
I mean, he wrote.
Or some Georgia Vivier arrangements back in the day. Great arranger, you know. We the bass collective don't just play the bass. You know, we just had the last guy to leave the gig because we got to pack up the bass and the amp. You know, we do other things too, like write great arrangements. You know. Yeah. Rufus Reed writes some great big group arrangements, big originals, just lovely writing. So we do something else besides play roots.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing too. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Once again, you know, you start on an E flat. I like that a lot. It's funny too, because if you really think about it, with a seventh chord, the fifth, for the most part, is the odd note out. You can't really tell, is it a major, is it a minor? But that third tells you everything.
Yeah. speaking of my book, there's a story in there. One of the questions I'm often asked in these kind of talk events, did Miles ever tell you what to play? Because that's the reputation he's kind of earned over the years due to no one really knowing what he talks about. They say, "Hey man, did he ever tell you what to play?" So I tell them this short story. We were doing Autumn Leaves, and I just had enough of playing the G minor for the last chord, the dominant seven, going back to the top of the tune.
Yep.
So I wait till the fourth beat of that last measure and play the B natural.
Right.
And everybody does this, and they don't want to do it. So, after about 2 or 3 bars of Wayne solo, Miles walks behind me and pulls my chord and said, "What was that note?" I said, "It's a B natural. Make that G minor chord a G7. A natural way to go to C minor. Don't talk to me because I can't talk back to him and play at the same time. But that B natural, that's that third you talk about. Everyone expects a G when they want a G minor. I said, no, G7, man, and go back to the top of the C right there. It's perfect."
Yeah. That's so true. And how you look at it as a G7, I'm just thinking, oh, it's just the passing tone below, but it has its own function.
Absolutely.
It is a third.
Yes. Yeah. And this is going on in real time.
Yeah.
And of
But
course,
you
the
know
trick
that
is,
stuff. So you've got your plan. You're not just picking apples.
Picking apples.
yes.
That's going to be your new book. I'm not just picking apples.
Well, no, we're thinking about doing another version of this time, using a blues with the Miles Band or something like that for
okay.
versions, because they really got kind of outrageous, man. The harmony and rhythm. I mean, you can't play walking but so many ways without going outside some kind of way, And
That's true.
we haven't decided what the next part 2 of this is, but we're on to some nice ideas here.
How long did that book take? How long did Chartography take?
I guess about 4 months all total.
Now, did you have the concept that we're going to have the songs, we're going to have the various harmonies, we're going to work it out, or did somebody help you with the quote unquote technical aspects of things?
I'm not sure what you mean technical. I had someone help me transcribing it.
No, I mean, like, for instance, at the very beginning in your key to it, numbers occur, the 3/4 rhythmic idea you had.
Well, the idea, that kind of stuff was a combination of everybody. I called my office manager who works the printing this stuff out, and Dave Barron and Bruce Mouth, the colors. What's the best color they have on the book to get their attention, given the amount of information on each page. I mean, look at the page 3. You got 3 different colors on there, would have the significant impact on what you're going to hear. And to decide the right color and how dark is it, and when you make multiple copies, is it going to fade out, and are they easy to go back to the first page and say, oh, number 3 means that, and number 4 means that, and this new E flat 7 with this different kind of color, that means that. And those decisions, it was a group decision. I would present a chord change. They would say, we say what it is, and we would try to figure out what's the best color for the different harmonies we use, and what's the best color to outline what rhythms occur somewhere else, so they can go back to the chart and say, oh yeah, that's that rhythm that we heard in the first version, number 3, or wherever it is. So that kind of physical manipulation of information was a group, a very, very actively and equal opportunity choice words, a necessary point of view to make this kind of thing come off. But before
the reason I asked is book 2 is going to be a lot faster because you got all that down.
That's in theory, but depends on what the tune's going to be too.
Well, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not transcribing, it's going to be a lot quicker.
For those guys.
One of the things I want to ask you, Ron, I mean, your career spans the record album, the 8-track, the cassette, the CD. I have a record collection back there. You'll find Peg Leg and Dear Miles and all blues and other records. But now we're in the streaming world. And I know some of your records didn't come out in the United States. You're a recorder for Japanese label. David and I like to know, do you think it's the best of times or the worst of times? Because now you as an artist can go directly to an audience. You don't have to sell your record or convince your record company to put something out. So is the power all in the hands of the artist now?
Well, you know, I'm a little concerned about that because the audience has a chance to disrupt my story. When I make a record, I have a plan. I have a plan in my mind.
Right.
I pick the right keys, the right order of songs, the right
Right. The
mix.
running. Yeah.
And for them to just pick track 3 of my record, that destroys my story. In theory, of course, you know.
Right.
And I would like to have them hear how that third tune fits into the whole record. So that's kind of out of my control now that the streaming is kind of taking over that part of the presentation.
Yes, that's playlists are a fact of life now.
Well, they're a fact. I'm not sure of life, but it's clearly a fact. You know, a fact of life is that they're underpaying us. That's a fact of life.
Well, that's another issue.
And there's a movement now that's starting to get some momentum that the powers, whoever they are that be, I call them the non-stripers, have a chance to make the pay a lot more equal than it has been. Many, within the past few years, musicians thought the solution to not getting the royalties, whatever they would amount to, would be to put their own record out.
Right.
So they had their own labels. But that was fraught with as many problems because they didn't pay the guys who were publishers of their songs that they recorded. They were not originals.
Right.
You know, so that itself had its issues. That was not a complete solution because the solution is bigger than just having your own record label.
Right. You still have distribution, right? Yeah.
What does that really mean? No, not just distribution. You record a Herbie Hancock tune, you record a Roger Hart song, you record a Miles Davis. Who pays those guys? For the publishers, the writers, they're supposed to get paid. And these independent, the independent guys who are doing it, they never occurred to them that it's not pure profit, man. You got to pay all these bills after you make the disc. Right. It isn't just going to the studio. You know, a streaming, it seems to make the music more immediately available. I just don't care for the order which is made that they have a chance to listen to a record that's out of order, which is out of the order which I recorded it, because it's a package for me.
Right.
It's like going to book and read page, starting at page 7. Well, who does that? Well, the listeners of jazz records. Really? That's okay? No, I'm not okay. Having said that, streaming is the way it is, and we just hope that some kind of way we can balance out the clearly unequal payment process.
Right.
And we can kind of get on with our business of making music and not be so concerned with being taken advantage of one more time.
Right.
I know you commented in the book, in Dan's book, about just the aesthetic of the album, whereas the CD medium, I believe you commented, was a little bit too long. An LP was about 37, 40 minutes, where the CD extended that to 75 minutes, which might be too much information. And of course, there's the beauty of the artwork of an album cover.
Yeah, you know, one of the reasons I think that the CD length was detrimental to the artist was I'm not sure, guys, how many artists we could think of the younger generation, just for that, could put together a story for 75 minutes and have everyone read every chapter. I haven't seen that. I'm sure someone has done that because I said it's difficult. I'm sure they'll find 9 guys who say, hey, man, I did that, you know.
Yeah.
But again, if you looking for standards, the kind of blue is like no more than 37 minutes, man.
That's it, yeah.
And the music is incredible. Not just that it's sold out of records. Oh, yeah, all right. But the fact is, every track has value. And every track is a strong statement, besides being new for its time. That's a given. And I'm not so sure that a record that's 65 minutes long has the internal wherewithal to make everyone want to buy this record because it's got so much music on it. Total music.
Yeah.
You know?
It makes a great deal of sense.
And the guys in Japan, they said, Mr. Carter, don't make a record any more than 50 minutes. That was their limit.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
They understood that.
Plus, as kids, I would study an album cover, even if there were no words on it.
Yeah.
you know, and if you think about it, 37, 40 minutes of staring at a record with no words is probably enough. But by the time you're done, the record is finished. And no, very, very good point. Do we have 75 minutes of, maybe that's why streaming has, maybe that's one of the reasons why. But I don't know, who are we talking to, Tom, about a greatest hits out? It was Rudy Sarza.
Yeah, right. How he disdained greatest hits albums because, like you said, Ron, it was disrupting the story
Sure.
of the album. Yeah.
And again, I guess it's okay to have your music put out wherever the form you can get it, because
Right.
everything is changing and being eliminated and made smaller along the way. We're concerned right now is how many jazz clubs are going to be in action once they open it up, whatever that finally means. So that's maybe one or two less locations for us to experiment.
Right.
Our laboratory is getting smaller and smaller, and to have a greatest hits kind of thing, it really even dilutes our worth, musical and musical worth, because it's in the wrong place,
And I think nowadays the record companies, with no disrespect to young people, but when you have bean counters basically handling everything, at least in the 70s and 80s, for me, which were my, mostly gigging years, the A&R people and the business people were passionate about music.
Right.
Now we've gotten to the point where we have accountants doing the music. It's not the same thing. So,
Dave, I'm not quite. I would add to that statement a footnote saying that it isn't just the bean counters are unchanged, but the people who are the producers. I'm not sure their historical background, their historical leaning toward the background of this music has been carried over to the current view of the current people who are calling the shots, who determine who gets the record date, what they're going to record, that kind of stuff. I think those people are a different breed right now.
yeah.
I give you an example. Years ago when they would have commercials, they would always have, if there was a music with a video with guys on, they would hire a real jazz player to hold the bass correctly, and the saxophone wouldn't be held with the wrong hands. But the producers knew the music. They knew who Coleman Hawkins was. They knew who Ben Webster was. They knew Train before he was trained. And so they wanted some authenticity to this project, so they would know what saxophone should be held. I think the current bunch of producers, and I hope they don't call my house day after tomorrow, I think they're not so concerned, they're not so aware of that part of the music that the older generation was, and they've kind of gotten another view of how best to present this music. Okay, that's their view. It clearly is contrast to the influence that the producers had, Ashwin Nerd and Nashwin Erdigan and Bob Porter and Esmond Edwards, George Avakian, that bunch of people, they knew the history because they were a part of the history.
Yes.
And I think the current producers, because they were not physically a part of that history, they've kind of decided that it wasn't too much there for them to worry about because it's past them.
Sad, but probably very, very true.
Sorry.
No. It's okay.
I want to be wrong, every now and then, except the thirds. I'm just saying they're always right.
That's great.
So, Ron, to continue on your COVID intermission, let me put the question to you,
Okay.
Ron Carter. What's the first thing you're going to do on the gig?
I'm going to look around and say, where have you guys been?
Yeah.
We've had some group conversations over the past year and a half or so, just to get a feeling of how much we're missing each other,
Yeah.
And someone was putting together a tribute to Bill Chick Corea, and they having piano players play some of Chick Corea's library, and I was asked to be. They asked a piano player to play one of the Chicks tunes, and the piano player called me to be an assistant to them, and it was yeah, I can do that. And I think I even knew the song because I recorded with Chick at some point, you know, back in the day. But it's just nice to be out in the street with a live musician, you know, in a real situation of a studio with some real recording engineers who aren't part-time, who are really doing this job right. And there's tremendous awakening of those kind of feelings that we were all suppressing for 15 months or so, you know. It's a great thing to do. And the piano player was out of sight, and I said, well, we got to do this again. Yeah, 5 months from now.
Well, I must say the Vanguard does a loving job of streaming, even though no one's in the audience. At least the music's out there.
You get a great sound too, man. Those guys,
Oh,
those
boy.
guys know how to do it. Yes, absolutely. It's perfect. It's like it's not like being there, but it's as close as you can get and not be there. Because
Well, I think
they're perfect, man.
yeah, I think the benefit for that is now that they know how to do the film shoot, now how they know how to do the recording for it. When people are in the audience, now people who aren't in the audience are going to be able to benefit from it too. So I think there will be a good thing from it like that.
Great. I hope so, because they're nice, and they're all nice kids. I call them kids because they're 25. They're kids to me. They're really nice people who
Yeah.
care about the music, and they care about the visual presentation of this music.
Yeah, it was obvious. I've watched a number of them. There was a great one. Well, you've worked with Bill Frisell. He did a
Yeah.
great one with Thomas Morgan. That was, I mean, it's so crystal clear to see and crystal clear to hear. It's beautiful.
Sure. Yeah,
Really-
it's perfect. Yeah.
yeah.
However, that will not be the solution to this music. No, we cannot survive on that.
Right.
Or neither can the clubs. It's nice. It's a nice thing to do. We need that interaction, but it's not gonna. It will not. What's the right word? It will not encourage that presentation too many more times once the club's open.
Okay. Okay.
We have a special event, you know. Okay, you know, because you know how
Yeah.
to do it. But I think that say you can have one night a week streaming to that. No, don't do that.
I see what you're saying. Yes. Yeah, I understand.
So Ron, how do you explain to people what it's like to not play a gig for 15 months?
I just tell them what I've been busy doing. I'm teaching 10 private students online.
Right.
I've worked on this Chartography for 4 months of that time, plus other books. I've accepted that I can't play with them until it's okay to play with them. You know, and I understand that decision is completely out of our control. We all of us, the jazz community in this case, have lost so much work and so much of a chance to experiment. You know, one of the things I missed most of all, Tom and David, is not having to make those decisions. I have to worry about the tune or the order, the speed, what key, the solo, who solos, how long do they solo, what happens if the audience doesn't respond to the song I want them to respond to. For 15 months, man, I haven't had that grief, which is a lovely part of being a band leader.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So right now, I'm enjoying taking the garbage out on time, going to the laundry, walk to the post office. You know, I'm loving that kind of stuff. And now, come September, when Broadway opens and New York starts to get more busy, those pleasures of house being will be limited because I'm out there doing what I used to do, working. So I try to explain that sense to people when they ask me, well, what do you do? How do you feel about not working? And when people ask you, what are you not working, what do you think about? That, you know, I miss being responsible, but I have other responsibilities now that I'm responsible for, and I don't shirk those at all.
Makes sense.